There is a stretch of water, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, that right now is deciding whether your gas prices go up, whether your grocery bill rises, and whether the United States economy tips into a recession. It's called the Strait of Hormuz. And as of today, it is closed. Not a storm. Not an accident. Closed because of a war. A war that the United States started on February 28, 2026. A war that has already cost American taxpayers $29 billion. A war that has killed 13 American soldiers. And a war that has triggered what the International Energy Agency is now calling the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you exactly how we got here, what's happening right now, and most importantly, what it means for you and your wallet. Because this is not just a foreign policy story. This is your economy. This is your gas pump. This is your dinner table. Let's go. To understand what's happening today, we need to go back to February 28, 2026. On that night, the United States and Israel launched a joint military attack on Iran. The stated goals were two things: stop Iran from building nuclear weapons and neutralize what the U.S. and Israel called a growing Iranian military threat. The initial U.S. estimate? The war would be over in 4 to 6 weeks. That was 3 months ago. What happened instead was not a quick victory. It was the opening of the most dangerous military conflict the Middle East has seen in decades. Iran retaliated immediately and hard. Iranian forces struck U.S. military bases in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, America's closest Gulf allies. They hit oil infrastructure in the region. And then, in a move that shocked global markets, Iran did something no country had ever done before in modern history. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. On March 4th, 2026, Iran effectively shut down the single most important oil shipping lane on the planet. And the world has not been the same since. What is the Strait of Hormuz? Now, if you don't know what the Strait of Hormuz is, here is why it matters to every single person watching this video, no matter where you live. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. It is, on average, just 21 miles wide, and through that 21-mile gap, every single day, flows approximately 20% of all the oil and natural gas in the entire world, 1/5 of the world's oil, through one narrow channel, every day. Saudi Arabia ships its oil through there, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, which supplies roughly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. All of it goes through the Strait of Hormuz. When Iran closed it, those shipments stopped. Stranded tankers piled up near the entrance. Qatar declared force majeure on all its gas exports, a legal term that means we cannot deliver what we promised because of something beyond our control. Oil prices, which were around $80 per barrel before the war, spiked past $120 per barrel almost immediately after the closure. At one point during the worst trading sessions, Brent crude hit nearly $114 a barrel, and Goldman Sachs warned those prices could last through 2027. For everyday Americans, that translated directly to the gas pump. Average U.S. gas prices shot from around $2.93 per gallon to over $3.70 per gallon within weeks. And that's not the ceiling. That's where things are right now. If the strait stays closed longer, analysts say prices could go much higher. This is not an abstract foreign policy issue. This is the most direct and immediate economic threat most Americans have faced since the 1970s oil crisis. 3 months of war. What happened? So what happened over the last 3 months? Let me walk you through the key moments. February 28th, U.S. and Israel attack Iran. Trump says the war will be over in 4 to 6 weeks. March 4th, Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. Global oil markets go into shock. The International Energy Agency calls it the largest supply disruption in history. March 10th, Trump issues Iran an ultimatum. He threatens to hit Iran's power plants and says the U.S. would respond 20 times harder to any further escalation. Oil prices briefly drop 10% on that news. Early April, a ceasefire is announced on April 7th. Both sides pull back slightly. Markets breathe a temporary sigh of relief. But the ceasefire doesn't hold. Strikes continue. Iran's Revolutionary Guard hits U.S. bases. The U.S. strikes Iranian drone launch sites near the Strait. The back and forth continues even while diplomats try to negotiate a peace deal. May 2026. Oil prices are back above $100 per barrel. The war has now cost American taxpayers $29 billion. 13 U.S. service members have lost their lives. And the Strait of Hormuz, the oil channel that feeds the world, remains under Iranian control and restriction. Several thousand Iranians are believed to have been killed in U.S. and Israeli strikes. The war that was supposed to be over in a month is now entering its fourth month with no clear end in sight. The deal talks. How close are they? Here is where things stand right now. As of today, May 28, 2026. Both sides are talking, but calling it close to a deal is complicated. Trump has publicly said the deal is largely negotiated, and that it centers on one key demand. Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for the U.S. lifting its blockade of Iranian ports. But here is the tension. Trump also said this week that he will not be rushed. He warned Iran that any strategy of trying to outlast him won't work. And the White House has already dismissed Iranian state media reports that suggested the terms of a deal had been finalized, calling those reports premature. Iran's foreign ministry, for their part, said the two sides are both very far and very close to an agreement, which tells you just how fragile and unpredictable these talks really are. Meanwhile, hardline Republicans back home are already attacking Trump from the right. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo publicly compared the emerging deal to the Obama-era Iran nuclear agreement, calling it not remotely America first. Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE are putting pressure on Trump to stop the military strikes. They're worried about further Iranian retaliation hitting their own oil infrastructure. And behind the scenes, the U.S. military and Iranian forces are still striking each other. This week alone, the U.S. hit Iranian drones and launch sites near the Strait. Iran responded by hitting an American airbase. Ceasefires are being declared, and broken talks are happening, and stalling. This is not a crisis moving toward resolution. This is a crisis moving in circles, while the world's economy bleeds. What it means for your wallet. Let me bring this home for you. Literally. You feel this war every time you fill up your gas tank. You feel it every time you buy groceries. You feel it in your electricity bill, your airline ticket, your Amazon delivery that costs more to ship. Oil is not just gasoline. Oil is the foundation of the entire modern economy. Plastics, fertilizers, medicines, manufacturing, shipping, all of it runs on oil. When oil prices rise, everything rises. Economists are now calculating the inflation hit from this war. One major analysis found that even under an optimistic scenario, where the strait reopens within one quarter, U.S. headline inflation rises by 0.6 percentage points and stays elevated through late 2026. The S&P 500, the benchmark for how America's biggest companies are performing, was already down around 3% since the start of the year. Goldman Sachs warned that high oil prices could persist through 2027 if a deal isn't reached soon. And the impact is global, not just American. Countries in Asia that depend almost entirely on Persian Gulf oil, like Vietnam, have already seen fuel shortages and panic buying. Fertilizer prices are rising globally because fertilizer is made from natural gas, and natural gas supplies from Qatar and other Gulf states are disrupted. Food security, energy security, economic stability, all of them tied to 21 miles of water in the Middle East. What happens next? So where does this go from here? Honestly, nobody knows for certain. But here are the three most likely scenarios that analysts are watching. Scenario 1. A deal is reached in the next few weeks. The strait reopens. Oil prices drop sharply. Markets recover. Trump declares victory. This is the best-case scenario and the one the world is hoping for. Scenario 2. Talks drag on for months. No deal. No escalation. But the strait stays partially restricted. Oil prices stay high, and inflation keeps grinding up. A slow, painful economic bleed with no dramatic resolution. Scenario 3. Talks collapse and the war re-escalates. Strikes resume at full intensity. Oil prices shoot past $130, $140 per barrel. The global economy tips toward recession. This is the scenario that keeps economists and governments awake at night. Which scenario plays out depends on two things: Trump's patience, and whether Iran's new leadership, which Trump himself has called much more reasonable than before, is willing to make the concessions needed to reopen the strait. The next 30 days are critical. A deal announced now would change the entire economic picture for 2026. A deal that falls apart would be catastrophic. Here is what you need to take away from this video. The U.S.-Iran war is not just a Middle East story. It is an American story. It is your story. Every dollar more you pay at the pump, that's this war. Every dollar more you pay for food, that's this war. A strip of water 21 miles wide is controlling the price of oil, the trajectory of inflation, and the health of the U.S. economy right now. And the people negotiating its future are doing so while both sides are still actively firing at each other. This is one of the most consequential geopolitical situations of our time, and most Americans have no idea how directly it affects their daily lives. Now you do. If this video gave you clarity on something you weren't fully understanding, hit that like button. It helps more people find this content. Subscribe to NNC Global News for daily breakdowns of the stories that actually matter to your life. We'll see you in the next one.